This little angel has a secret love.
Don't get caught.
Such a devious boy, heavens above.
Don't get caught.
And she simply can't resist.
The smooth shell of Cadbury Dairy Milk Chocolate and the irresistible creamy flowing yolk that will ultimately give them away.
Don't get caught with egg on your face. Can't resist them Cadbury cravings.
Don't get caught.
Hello, welcome to the Television Affair number 17. Johnny here, and we are continuing with the Box Plus network. If you've not watched part 1, where we have a look at the box, the hits, Q, Heat and Kiss, check out the previous episode for some more context. We're going to continue on now with Smash Hits. Smash Hits, which could have potentially been a terrible brand, was a channel launching in 2001. It was based on Smash Hits magazine and would be mainly focused on teen pop music. Smash Hits was also dotted around the country on DAB radio, but in some places it would later be removed for the exciting world of traffic radio.
Coming up next on Traffic Radio, the current road situation.
Smash Hits magazine would close in 2006 and the radio station closing in 2013. The TV channel would be rebranded to the Box Hits in 2016, and Box Hits would stay on air until the end of June 2022, when it changed to 4 Music.
4 Music is moving on the 29th of June.
Magic came on air on the 13th of September 2001. For that reason, nobody probably even noticed it was on air, because the world had bigger things on its mind at the time. Making sure it was filling in the retro gap in the network, it was also mimicking its radio version, Magic, that played classic hits from the 1970s to the present day.
On 1161 medium wave and in digital stereo on DAB, this is Yorkshire and Lincolnshire's Magic.
It also had shows based around decades, retro countdowns and artists. The Magic brand had existed as a local radio brand for quite some time. In the late 80s and early 90s, radio stations were moving from their medium wave frequencies to better sounding FM frequencies. That meant that their old frequencies were just kind of there. The trend of the day was to make radio stations with new music and the best of the oldies, but they weren't keen on dropping songs from the 1960s because they still had a large audience, but it didn't fit with their new sound. It was the same for some of the presenters as well, so stations with new names on old frequencies started showing up. So GWR in Swindon and Bristol became Brunel Classic Gold. Capital in London had Capital Gold. Pennine Radio, aka the Pulse of West Yorkshire, then owned by the Radio Partnership, had Great Yorkshire Gold. Piccadilly in Manchester did slightly differently. They changed into Piccadilly Gold, and then their new FM service was called Piccadilly Key 103. In Hull, Viking was joined by Viking Gold. Over in Leeds, Radio Aire station was called Magic 828. A few years later though, Key and Viking, who were both part of the same network as Radio Aire, renamed their gold stations to Magic, along with some of the other Magics popping up as part of the group. Now, that very informational diagram you can see that I made showing you about all the Magic stations actually was a massive fail, because it doesn't show you the thing I wanted to show you, which was how big the Magic network actually was. So there was one in London, formerly known as Melody FM, and that got renamed to Magic 105.4 in 1998. Don't know what other Magics. One in Preston, taken over from Red Rose Gold. In Newcastle, formerly known as GNR, and also in Radio City in Liverpool, from that massive tower that seems like they don't know what to do with right now. Oh yeah, and one in Middlesbrough that used to be Radio Tees. The other main brand of gold station back then was Classic Gold, and that was run by GWR since 1994 and sold to UBC Media in 2002. Unique Broadcasting is what it was actually called, was originally formed by Noel Edmonds in 1985. UBC sold it back to GWR/Capital when all those mergers happened. Magic would end up networking shows with a national version launching on DAB in the 2000s, and Bauer had this thing that I mentioned before called the Big City or the Bauer City Network, and in the 2010s under Bauer City there were 3 versions. There was Bauer City 1, Bauer City 2 and Bauer City 3. Bauer City 1 were their main stations that played current chart music, and Bauer City 2 was the local Magic stations, but at one point they decided to change all of those to their heritage names, and Bauer City 3 was their national station, The Hits. That had already been on Freeview and on DAB for quite some time. They changed their mind after a while and actually decided to rename them as their heritage stations, but with number 3. They'd still all air the same thing, and they'd also keep the Hits radio on DAB and on Freeview. There was also about to be another but bigger rebrand about to take place right after Bauer purchased Jazz FM and the Orion Radio Group and the Celador Radio Group and the Lynx FM Radio Group and the Wireless Radio Group, and some of TLRC. All of those mergers meant now that Bauer owned Absolute Radio and Jack FM, kind of. Not the brand, the actual station itself they did. That's another story. Anyway, they rebranded everything and they're still rebranding newly purchased stations. Generally, and this is a rough guide, the former Bauer City 1 stations and the newly acquired stations that fit a hot adult contemporary format is now known as Hits Radio. They play mostly top 10 chart music from about the past 20 years, but heavy on the current music. Former Bauer City 2 stations, or ones that go under a format called Adult Contemporary, are named Greatest Hits Radio. This is aimed at a 35-plus-year-old audience, playing music roughly inside the top 10 from the 1970s to the present day. The general idea is that in every area, on FM and DAB, you'll be able to pick up both Hits Radio and Greatest Hits Radio. With all that palaver, it meant that the Bauer City 3 network was made redundant. The Magic stations would have come under the Bauer City 2 network, which some of them did at some point, but that didn't last that long. And then what would happen is that Magic would end up going on to DAB, so technically the brand was saved. The reason for that was probably because it had a strong brand. Magic mostly plays older music rather than new music, and it had a strong female audience. Magic launched some spin-offs online, including Magic Soul, Magic Chilled, Mellow Magic, and Magic Power Ballads. The TV channel is still on air, at least for the time being. I think Magic's idents, these ones and the ones I just showed you, were actually some of the best ones out of all the channels in this episode and the last one. I really like them. Let me know what you think in the comments. That's giving me Crusher vibes. Do you remember Crusher?
I want some Crusher, a glass of Crusher. It's tough enough to make milkshake.
Kerrang TV was a brand originally a magazine covering rock music and then launching as a TV station in 2001 and a radio station in 2002. The radio channel was on Freeview at first, as well as being on DAB in the north, and then in 2004 it came to 105.2 FM in the West Midlands, broadcasting from Birmingham. Both the TV channel and the radio station will play rock and heavy metal music. The radio station would end up having presenters such as Tim Shaw, Kate Lawler and Nick Margerison. Other presenters included Loz Guest, Alex Baker and Johnny Doom, who are all still at the station. OJ Borch hosted also for a bit with Kate Lawler on the drive time. The station in Birmingham would get replaced by Planet Rock, and the station would dot around in various locations in the UK on DAB for a little bit, but in 2023 it would return as a national DAB station. The TV channel is still on air under license by Bauer to use the name for Kerrang, and that is actually the case for the rest of their stations. This is quite an important thing to point out because even though Channel 4 are currently running those stations, Bauer still owns all of those names. Now there's one thing that could happen, which may also be happening with another brand we mentioned already, Jack FM. Bauer bought the local Jack FMs and converted them to Greatest Hits Radio. The Jack FM brand is still owned by its original owners, which means that they can do whatever they want with it, and true to their brand, they've said they'll return when they want. In theory, that means Bauer could do exactly the same thing. They could take back their names and relaunch the channels. Whether they'd actually do that is a different story, because the reason why Channel 4 wants to get rid of them is because they are not generating enough money. The Box Plus network is run by Red Bee Media, who are a huge broadcasting company, and if you don't have much media knowledge, you won't know about them, a little bit like Flex Tech. They're the guys who make the channels do their thing and get music videos and trailers to play when they should. They also sort out any technical issues that might happen on the channel, but it's mostly scheduling and the broadcasting end. On September 25th, 2021, there would be quite a big technical issue, which is something I'm going to go into in the next video. The thing that made the box unlike MTV was this interactive element. You could call up a number and select a song, and it was really simple, and I think there's still legs in that, even in a digital world with YouTube's existence. The positive thing about linear TV is that you don't have to make the effort to keep picking what's next. On the Discord recently, I mentioned that I was sort of fatigued with having the option to pick, and if I didn't pick, then nothing would play. On a Sunday morning sometimes, I just don't have the energy for it. With things like music, I personally think it's a good idea to get guidance on what is trending and have some new things brought to my attention. This is kind of why I think linear TV is good. Now, if you think about it in a radio term, a radio presenter in the old days used to pick what songs they were going to play, or maybe a producer did, or someone like that, but somebody had knowledge of the music, and they'd also keep an eye out for new talent. All in all, this creates a richer content. What I'm actually finding doing these documentaries is that people are relying more on automated sequences rather than the human interaction that we used to get with television and radio. For instance, TV and radio shows that used to have two producers and a DJ would now be cut down to one producer and a DJ, but what you're lacking out of that is the knowledge of that other producer. Now, if you think of it this way, and I'm not saying this is the sole reason, but over the years, the decline on detail within the quality and the worth of a piece of media content correlates to a decline in audience. Now, to say that cuts are made because of the decline in audience is just not true, because it's usually the production company or the TV channel that wants to make those cuts in the first place. And what producers and executive producers think is that we're going to be able to retain that audience but just spend less money on them. Well, what ends up happening is that the audience see a decline in the quality and they drop off. So what I've found with my experience in the media and also doing these documentaries is that media companies don't want audiences to think that their system or the way they work has any flaws or anything like that, so they try and spin it the other way. So they will say they had to make cuts because of loss in audience, but actually it's because the audience realised there was a decline in quality. You can see this in local radio, for instance. They'd been cutting that and cutting for so many years to the point now where they actually have a number of huge brands taking over their old networks, whereas in the 80s and 90s those networks were localised and they were bringing in more money back then. They also had a heck ton more staff. Same for ITV, again, another instance of that they used to produce lots of local programming and it did really well for the rest of the network. Well, how much do you see that now? You might say Emmerdale and Coronation Street, and yeah, you're correct, but they were originally produced by their local companies, and since about 2003, what other regular TV shows has ITV had that's as consistent as Coronation Street and Emmerdale? That was a bit of a tangent I went on there, but basically what I'm trying to say is all about quality. In a way, it's a little bit like in-vision continuity. So when the in-vision continuity happened, the person sat there and explained to you what was happening next and what was happening later and all that kind of stuff. They'd also put a little bit of personality into it, and it was also a great way to fill time. They also used to talk about local stuff, so the presenter on TV may have talked about like an event happening nearby, or maybe even just something like a road closure or something. Having a person on screen also makes you feel more important and reminds you that you're a human. Nowadays, all you get is an ident. and if you're lucky, you'll get about 10 seconds worth of a continuity announcer telling you what's coming up next. I didn't mean to go off on that tangent about quality, but that is a point that I want to put out there. Now, as to whether Bauer are going to do anything with their brands TV-wise is a different story. So disregarding that at the moment, Channel 4, if they do want to continue music channels but slim it down a bit, then I've got a couple of suggestions. Firstly, all the music is going to be picked by viewers like the old days. All the channels would have designated times where they have request segments, and the idea would be to push it as a national jukebox that you can add messages to the video. I'd investigate whether it's viable to make money from the selection process, but I would commission a box app that you could watch the linear channels from and also watch music videos as a choice type thing. The reason why I think this would work is that not many places have requests anymore, but radio stations do still get them. They just don't play them because it doesn't fit with their format, or they're a national radio station now being networked from places like the Hits Radio. So sometimes they're ignored, or stations like Radio 1, they don't want to deviate from their playlist. So the new box network would aim to be different to other music channels and to simplify things. So they'd be very music based, feature live and pre-recorded shows, but interactivity would be its big thing. Music based programming would be on in the evenings, such as documentaries, artist playlists and performance from Channel 4 and maybe even the BBC. As well as regular TV channels, it would be available online and on the app. There'd also be a special section on the app where you can click audio only, so if you're driving you can still listen. The first channel would be The Box, straightforward The Box. Its main focus will be music from the 90s, 2000s and 2010s and current music aimed at Gen X and millennials mainly. The channel echoes the original Box channel in style. There would be some playlists that changed on a regular basis, and the genre specific hours including rock and indie, pop, dance, house, dubstep and drum and bass, rap and R&B, or years where you could pick the music from. So if the dedicated year was 1996, the playlist would have 200 songs from that year. There would also be a TV version of the 10-minute takeover from Radio 1, but the difference in that would be that it would be a whole hour and maybe 4 till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This would be focused on people travelling to and from work, and it would be pretty much a free-for-all, so people could text in the exact thing they want to be aired, and if there is a video of it, then it gets played. So that could even include TV show themes, computer games, music from different decades that I've not mentioned for the channel, and even songs from memes. The channel would use programming from the Channel 4 archive, maybe even the BBC's, like I said before, but that would be mostly live shows and performances, and the channel would have shows with presenters, sometimes live shows, sometimes at Breakfast and Drive, maybe even something like Power Up, like Chris Evans used to do, or dare I say it, The Big Breakfast. It would have pre-recorded shows during the day or just back-to-back music. The Box would also be on air overnight on Channel 4 and over the breakfast period until 9 a.m. Bye-bye, Frasier. Box Fresh will be the next channel, and that's all about fresh and current music. There'll be segments dedicated to unsigned bands and new music, as well as live performances and festival coverage. Box Fresh would be on E4 overnight and during the breakfast until 9 a.m. Box Gold would be a classic music channel with music videos from the 1960s to the 1990s. It would use Channel 4's archives and shows that used to air in the 1980s and the 1990s, so including The Tube, and it would air some programs from stations across Europe, sometimes dubbed or subtitled. It would air on more for overnights and during the breakfast period. And then finally, a channel aiming to bring back a bit of a difference to the Channel 4 network. 4U is aimed at a general audience, but where Channel 4 is aimed at an older audience during the day, 4U would be aimed at young families. Overnight and during some of the day, it would play music videos, and some of this will be based in a radio studio that plays music videos and joined by a presenter with a small team.
Gijs, wat is jouw nieuws? Ik heb dus sinds vanochtend een dashcam. Hartstikke leuk. Ik ben blij voor je. Wat een nieuws.
4, 6, de wild in de middag, daar komt jouw cowboy aan. Hit sinds het holster, las hem om je heen. Laat je paard even staan. Hij schiet met schep in de saloon van 2. Luc in Luc kan we gaan. 4, 6,
Radio 2.
From 6 till 9 a.m. and 3 till 6 p.m. after school and before school, there would be a kids strand bringing kids shows back to Channel 4. These would ideally have been produced in the last 10 years from independent producers or from channels that aired overseas.
Hallo, Tom. Hallo, Buba.
Weekend daytimes would be a kids and teen strand similar to T4, featuring music and comedy in the daytime, and that would start from about 10 o'clock in the morning till about 4 or 5, where they would have a family film. After 6 p.m, the audience age would focus on more of the parent side, and at 10 p.m, the channel would have programming dedicated to an 18 plus audience with, we've seen this brand before, the foreplay strand. This would include comedy and dramas close to the knuckle and designed to push boundaries. The channel would have a mix of Channel 4 classic, risky content with a red triangle, movies, and would have dedicated nights like the old days, like when they did Pot Night, or seasons dedicated to cultures or special events. And there would also be some stand-up comedy with a strand similar to Adult Swim with animation from across the world. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that, and that's it for this time. So on the next one, we'll be looking at the UK's biggest technical problem and how it happened. If you like what I'm making and you feel like throwing a few coins my way, here's a couple of ways you can do that. Join as a member of the channel or via Patreon, and if you want to just do a one-off, I've also got coffee. The links are in the description. Thanks to all the following team members on YouTube and Patreon. Those include Joseph Adams, Stephen Bride, Hooter Noodles, Matthew Beckley, Mark Jackson, Manuel Mobius, Chris Elliott, Tracker John, Samuel Desmond, and Kieran Dykes. The executive producers were Tim Goodwin and Computer Tom. I've been Johnny Robinson, and I'll still be Johnny Robinson after this video's finished. Thank you, bye.
Bye.